most important thing I can say, in my opinion, is what I'm going to say now. If Black America does not reconstitute the 7 historic Black institutions, we're finished.
Welcome to the Black Appalachian Coalition's podcast entitled Black Remembering, where we will bring to you the heavy and the hope across the Ohio River Valley. We want to remember who we are, where we've come from. We want to speak to the oral history of what we've done, what we've achieved. We want to speak to the ills that we have experienced, while also finding solutions to those problems, those issues. We want to deal with the narrative that has kept us deeply rooted in despair. Now we want to punch through that narrative and stand up and say, we are remembering our Black past, and we are rooted, and we are here to stay. Welcome to Black Remembering. We hope that you find your place, your space, and your voice in this podcast.
Welcome. So tell people just a little bit more about Dr. Cosby, the person.
A native of Louisville, Kentucky. We're blessed with 2 adult kids, 4 grandkids. I have served as the pastor of St. Stephen Baptist Church for 45 years. I started when I was 6. No. But St. Stephen Church, my grandfather organized the church in 1926. He was a graduate of this institution back in the 1920s. He came to Simmons because in our state, the only school open to Blacks in the 20s was Simmons, especially if you wanted degrees in the advanced disciplines. So he came to Simmons and then started the church that I now pastor. He pastored 44 years and I've been there now for 45 years. It is literally, I would say, 7 blocks away from here. It is in the poorest zip code in Kentucky, 40210 zip code. The last time I checked, I think the median income of the residents for our church is about $15,000 median income. So all of the challenges that you associate with disinvested communities, that's what our church is. I decided when I went there in 1979 that I was going to plant my mailbox in concrete to stay there in that community and to try to make a difference. When I went there, the story of the resurgence of St. Stephen Church and the resurgence of Simmons College have a similar story. When I went to St. Stephen's, we had no money, no land. We were surrounded by nightclubs, liquor stores, gangs, all of these things. But we were able to acquire acres and acres of property, purchase the liquor stores, purchase the nightclubs. I say that we were able to acquire the land of the Hittites, Jebusites, Budlites, and the Shavites. We were able to build an institution there with a family life center and gyms and space that became a refuge for people who the society had written off and marginalized. Because the church became so strong, I became the president of Simmons College in 2005. Now, I was a professor at Simmons in the 1980s, but I got fired in the 1980s. I was messing with some women and I got fired. What I mean by messing with some women was our church decided to mess with some women who wanted to preach. Y'all thought I was something else. We don't judge nobody. Talk to me, my group. That's okay. Even David had a zipper problem in the Bible.
I just know.
That's right.
You go to church here.
That's right. And I was going to say this last thing, but so I got fired because our church became the first church to license women in ministry. And then the school that fired me turned around like 20 years later and rehired me as the president of Bazaar.
Well, I wouldn't call it bizarre. I think in our faith, we just call it purpose. We call it time. We don't know the journey. We don't know the pathway. And so that's a powerful statement. I think for me, what I look at, number one, is you're in the poorest area, but you're the largest African American church in the state. So that lets us know what it looks like when we put our faith and our feet in movement together, and our mouth is in movement with our faith. And so I'm just elated because when we talk about the work that we do, we're talking about the changes that we need to make. We're talking about we need our faith in action. How does the church get involved? What are some of the ways that we heal? And that's one of our first pillars, is like healing. And so my question is like understanding, that Simmons has had a painfully beautiful history. What did you have to do to begin the healing journey for the college?
Saturate myself with the history of this school. Know the story. If you know your story, tell your story, people support your story. And it is a remarkable story. Founded by enslaved people, it was the only Black college in America that had a medical school, law school, seminary, what's called a normal school, a teacher's college, that was under the governance of Blacks. In fact, the NAACP was founded in 1909. The first case they won before the United States Supreme Court was through Simmons Law School students. It's called Worley versus Buchanan. The namesake of the school, William J. Simmons, was one of the premier educators of the 19th century. In fact, he rivaled Booker T. Washington. And he was a womanist scholar in the 19th century. In fact, he gave a woman her first job, one of the most prominent Black women in American history, her first job. And that woman's name was Ida B.
Yeah, talk about it.
And then it's right down the street. There's a building built that we own that was built in 1873, first school for Blacks in the state of Kentucky, public schools. We were able to purchase it. It's wonderful, but we named the building after Ida B. It was called the Ida B. Hall. So knowing the story and the church, our church, because we were a strong church, because when I went to Simmons, we had nothing but history. We had no buildings, no money, and the church got involved and supported the institution. I came, would not take a salary. I didn't take a salary. I've been here 20 years. My first 12 years, I gave all of my money back to the school. And we got the school accredited. Once we got accredited, because the school never closed. During the Depression, we lost our buildings. All of our buildings that were built by slaves, we lost them to the rest of
History. It is important. How have they always changed the story about us to make themselves look like the heroes rather than the villains? Is they rewrite the story. And so us as Black people, what has been the way that we've held our stories? Through our oral histories, through our generations, by telling the stories one to another. And it's important because those things stay in your community. They sit in your church. These are the reasons why they want to tear the Black communities down, because there's so much richness there. If I can move you out of your culture, then I can move you to change your identity. And we cannot allow anyone, number one, to take our story, number two, to tell our story, number three, to put us in a place where we are in an identity crisis. And when you know your story, you know who you are. And you know whose you are. When we think about that, that brings me to this quest about justice. Justice is one of those things that I wrestle with, because I remember when Thucydides and what Socrates and all of these philosophers got together, they really couldn't agree on the definition of justice. What they did agree on was that they could use it against people they didn't like. They also agreed that they were the biggest criminals, but they could also use this system to exonerate themselves. So justice has really never been defined. I find myself even wrestling sometimes because in the Bible it says God is the face of justice. God is a God of justice. And today Our second pillar is justice, but I want to know, number one, how would you define justice on your quest for justice? And how do you know that you received it? Does it come from other people, Dr. Cosby, or is it something we should hold within ourselves, or is it a both thing?
For me, justice, and I'm being very practical when I think of justice, is finding out what belongs to whom and giving it to them. Yes. That's what justice is to me. Just finding out, sorting out what belongs to whom and giving it to them. It is foundational to salvation. My favorite Bible story is Luke 19. My favorite gospel is Luke. If you're rich and powerful, do not read the gospel. It's not your gospel. I'm a Lucan Christian, that Negro from Nazareth. But Zacchaeus, once he gets saved, says to Jesus, a half of my goods I give to the poor. So redistribution, so no one is hoarding. And if I defrauded anyone, I restore them fourfold. So if you steal my car on Monday and you get saved on Tuesday and you still driving my car on Wednesday, you were not saved on Tuesday.
Talk about it.
Right. Because justice says if you steal my car on Monday and get saved on Tuesday, on Wednesday, you're not only going to bring my car back, you're going to bring it with a tune-up, wash, everything you time. And the United States has never been a country of justice.
Say it.
Because justice is finding out what belongs to whom and giving it back to them. Right. And as long as you're hoarding and holding on to things that you know belong to Native populations, to women, to LGBTQI, to Black Americans, you hold on to it and you're not dispersing that, then you're not practicing justice.
Yeah. In that example, what I heard was there's a reparation component to that.
Absolutely.
And then there's a restorative element inside of that. And I know you are avid about reparation. And right now, people are struggling. I've sat in places where people have said, Black people don't know what to do with all that money. Mm-hmm. Just give them a house. Mm-hmm. Because we've had our turn. That's what they say. We've had our turn. And so they move towards the Latin population or, populations away from us because we've had our turn. But from what you're saying, they still owe us. Yeah.
We've never had a turn.
So I stand corrected.
Black America has never had a turn. We worked 246 years without a paycheck. Another 100 plus years of semi-slave. And we built the country. And we were never repaired. This is the okie doke. You got to be careful. Don't go for the okie doke. Yes. We've been given symbols, like a street named after Martin Luther King. We've been given holidays, like Juneteenth. We've been given images, like, look, that's the first Black, somebody in a position without power and status, without strength. Symbols, holidays, images, and tokens. Yeah. Yeah. And by the way, that is an acronym. Mm-hmm. Symbols, holidays, images, and tokens.
I caught it.
But we've never been repaired. In fact, one of the dilemmas that communities like I have here at Simmons is that we've experienced one-way integration where Black professionals move out of Black space. Mm-hmm. You have, and I'm dating myself, the Jeffersons who move away from Evans. Mm-hmm. So you have Blacks poor who are socially isolated. Mm-hmm.
Socially isolated. Yeah, you need to sit with that. Because we talk about so many forms of isolation, but we don't think about that social isolation and the impact that it has on us. So what I'm hearing is like so much of who we are and what we have to go through to get through is so multifaceted and multi-layered. It's like, how do you keep punching through the bricks? How do you keep pushing through to get up? We've been building on so much toxicity and trauma. I think we're still finding ourselves. And when I think about that, it takes me back to things that I've heard you say when we were in our classes together. But what I'd like to know is who or what has been the greatest inspiration to you and for you when it comes to doing justice? You know, why do you stand flat-footed the way that you stand? Because of who and on whose back?
I've been greatly influenced by Martin Luther King. And I'm not talking about the domesticated, housebroken king. Yes, I'm talking about the king who said, we come for our check. Talking about especially the king from 1966 to 1968. But I've also been influenced a lot by Stokely Carmichael. I believe in Black nationalism. And by that, I mean that I believe that Blacks must, if all I'm going to say today, the most important thing I can say, in my opinion, is what I'm going to say now. If Black America does not reconstitute the 7 historic Black institutions, we're finished. And by Black institutions, I'm talking about 3 C words: concerns, culture, cause. Concerns, culture, cause, control. 4. So it's a Black institution because Simmons is a Black institution because the governance is in the control of Black people. Right? Simmons is a Black institution because the concern is unapologetically Black people. Simmons is a Black institution because the culture of our band is unapologetically Black people. We have lost our institutions. We've been deinstitutionalized. We went from segregation to desegregation to integration to disintegration because we've lost like 7 institutions. Here are the 7. Black families, Black faith institutions. About faith institutions, I'm not talking about just running around church and all this kind of stuff. I'm talking about community. So it could be Islam, but Black faith institutions, Black families, Black faith institutions, Black media, Black businesses, Black schools, Black fraternal and sorority organizations, like the Divine Nine and Masons, Masonic groups, stuff like that. And Black empowerment and civil rights organizations. So what you're doing, your project, is you would be in one of those 7, namely the Black empowerment and civil rights organizations. And to the degree that we can strengthen what you're doing towards justice, churches towards justice, families, those 7, is to the degree that the Black community rises.
Yeah. And that's real, because that is the work. My organization is the Black Appalachian Coalition. And this whole thing is like, how do we become so unapologetic in all of these spaces, not offering excuses or justification as to why. And I'll be honest, I struggle. When I first started my nonprofit, or, founded the first nonprofit, it was called Black Women Rising. I wrestled. I literally, a Black woman, wrestled with saying Black Women Rising. I felt like I had to apologize for owning the fact that I am a Black woman who wants to rise. I lost the vision because Black Women Rising, when I started it, I was in Washington, D.C., sitting with all of these legislators, catching 2 headaches, listening to all of this stuff that they're talking about. They called everybody out in the room, but guess who? Black women. They created a space for everybody in the room, but guess who? Black women. So in the midst of it, I stood up and I said, you called everybody. A space for the Latinx and this group and that group and this. I said, but you didn't call a space for Black women's voices. I said, so I'd like to call the space. And I wasn't a bishop then. Oh, yes, Reverend Dinkins, we'll let you have the space. So they kept on talking. When it came time to dismiss to the spaces, Guess who they forgot? But I didn't. And so I stood up and I said, again, I want a space for Black women. You know what was interesting about that space? In that space, the Native American women came there. The Latinx women came there. We had the white women came there. We had the largest group of women there. And I got angry and I said, no, we need to rise. And that's what started the organization. But after I started it, I started wrestling with, who am I leaving out? Who am I this and who am I that? And so I felt so like I had to apologize for standing up and proclaiming. And somebody checked me and they said, if the Apostle Paul can say that he came for the Gentiles, then Bishop Marcia can say that she came for Black women.
Come on.
Yeah. Thank you. And that's when I had to learn. I don't have to apologize. My apologies were so bad, I bumped into a mannequin and I said, I'm sorry. And that is the truth. That let me know how often we apologize for being who we are.
And self-interested.
Yeah.
And being self-interested.
Yeah. When you mention that, it brings me to this point of like, convergence is crucial to our work, our lives and our community and our faith. You know, when I listen to you, it's like, how do we come to this place? You know, I think about the bodies of water. You have this single body of this single body, and then they come together as a tributary and they converge and they become a bigger body of water. Understanding that, yes, we have purpose and we have plight and we have pain as Black people. But in order to get to where we need to get to, there's also another thing called privilege. How do we bring people in who want to help restore and repair? They're not Black, though. We have Asian women in this room. We have white people in the room. We have diverse folks in this room. But how do we begin to think about, how do we converge all of this together? And I want to say again, unapologetically, it's about solidarity, but I don't have to apologize for who I am and what I want to do. But we have to walk on eggshells. Why? Because of the affirmative action being overturned. Because we don't know what diversity, equity, and inclusion is. But if we're talking about convergence, how should we be thinking about that and bringing things together? And one of the things that inspires me is how you brought Simmons and St. Stephen's. There's a convergence there.
Strong. There's a verse in the Bible that says, ye who are strong should bear the infirmities of the weak. Romans chapter 15, verse 2. So the beautiful thing about the history, like knowing your story, the Black church gave birth to so much that created the survival and the thriving of the Black community. So many colleges were started by the Black church. The Black church was the community chest. It was the strong, it was the institution that Black people governed, where Black people in control that had more money. So when the Black church, you could have a mega church and a mini mission.
Come on.
So only when the Black church is true to its origin, you are in the last designated HBCU in American history. And basically what gave birth to it, what gave it leash was a church. So now in terms of coalition building, I love Martin Luther King, his book, Stride Towards Freedom. He said, and I'll quote Stokely Carmichael and King. King said that a coalition is when two people or two organizations come together who have, and I'm paraphrasing him, self-interest that can merge into common interests. The problem often with coalitions when it comes to Blacks, we have to abandon our self-interest and merge exclusively into the interests of other people. Now, that's what King said. Stokely Carmichael, in his book, Black Power, has a whole section, a chapter on coalition that is worth reading. And basically, he says that if you're going to coalesce with someone, if you're going to coalesce with the elementary school bully, he said, first go lift weights. because someone who has all the power is going to set the criteria and the agenda for the coalition. And the problem, I think, with the Black community is that when often we're in coalition with whites, they set the agenda.
Exactly. Thank you.
They set the agenda. I think it's happening with the Democratic Party.
Mm-hmm. All of that is so true. Woo.
And we read a book in our PhD program, The Power and the Powerless, about Appalachia.
That's right.
And in that book, they say that power is anytime A can get B to do something that is against B's best interest, then A has power over B. Power is anytime A tells B what your options are. The duopoly of Democrat, Republican, sometimes, I might want another option.
Yeah. That's right. Yeah.
You know what I mean? You got conservatives, you got moderate neoliberals. I might want an extreme left leaning party that we don't have anymore. Because I don't hear either party talking about the plight of the poor. And that is why I like what Cornel West said. He said, who's running for president, he said, before I move into the White House, I'm going to first make sure that every houseless person has a house.
Oh, that's the whole body of his work.
Senator Neal.
Hello. Welcome.
Neighbor.
Thank you. He came right on time, didn't
Yes,
he?
he did.
Because we are having a conversation on policy. Senator Neal, I'd like for you to take a moment to introduce yourself to Bishop Marcia Dinkins, the founder and executive director of the Black Appalachian Coalition, and our work is in Kentucky, Ohio, West Virginia, and PA, and several other places. We're honored to have you here. So if you could take a few minutes and introduce yourself, and we're going to have like this policy conversation between Reverend Dr. Cosby, yourself, because we're in a rough time right now. Definitely. So the floor is yours for a few minutes.
That is a bonus stuff. Give me the floor. Let me just say, first of all, my name is Gerald Neal, and I'm serving the Kentucky State Senate, and I'm the floor leader of the Democrats in the Kentucky State Senate. I've been there a little while. I understand the game. But let me digress just a moment. It's always a pleasure for me to be on a panel with my learned, extraordinary leader, Dr. Kevin Paz Cosby. Also my neighbor, by the way. He keeps me straight in the neighborhood. Gives me support when I need it. And we play that way, right?
That's right.
First of all, and then I want to thank you. I'm not sure who I'm talking with because my schedule, much like him, he probably prepares better than I do, is extraordinary. I won't get into all of that. I'm not complaining. You're going to have to give me a little lead as to what's relevant so I just don't ramble with respect to that. So I'm here to answer any questions, to give you insights into what I do and my perspectives on that.
Thank you. So this is the third annual Black Policy Summit. Individuals who are their partner with the organization has, greatly involved. Some of them are my employees. Some of them are people who are part of the collective. You have people here from the Gulf South, from Texas, Mississippi, New York, Ohio, West Virginia, Ohio, PA, and I think the list kind of goes on a little bit. We've got a mayor in the back, so you have diverse population of people, educators, but more importantly, people who I like to call instruments of change, who are here because they want to see change within their community. So we've been talking about just our theme. Our policy summit is called Black Resurgence. 4 pillars under it is healing, justice, convergence, and resurgence. And so we're kind of talking about now, like the convergence of things, how we come together, how we're coalescing, coalition building, community building, building these relationships. And what are the ways that we should be thinking about converging? Dr. Cosby has really educated us, on the fact of the controls of being Black and unapologetic, but we need to regather ourselves, bring in our stories, and come to this place where we are setting the stage unapologetically to bring back those institutions that we lost. And one of the things that Dr. Cosby talks about that is close to my heart, but makes me angry as all outdoors, is the Black church. Because where are we? Where's our voice? And the Black church doesn't realize the power that it has. And I'm not trying to go to church on people. What I want people to understand is when we do our power analysis, when we do our asset analysis, when we do our resource analysis, we analyze everybody in the church, we analyze everybody in the White House and the State House and local government, but you leave out the church.
Mm-hmm.
And why is the church so important?
And that goes without saying. If you look at it historically, I think the church has demonstrated its importance and its power and its relevance. I don't think there's a question about that. What you're talking about is why isn't it doing more? Why doesn't it take the power that you perceive and apply it to the current reality projected into the future? I understand that. But there's one thing I always think about when my fields of study was not just political theory, but organizational structure and how those dynamics happen within organizations. And one thing is very clear to me, I see it over and over again, gets confirmed every time, is that when you come together, you create various variations of institutions. Some of that is just a 2-3 person kind of thing, and the others may be something formal and very precise in terms of like Simmons here, or let's say the Kentucky legislature or legislatures. But any institution, there's one thing about an institution. It defines its mission, and then it works very hard to perpetuate that. So it works to sustain itself. So when things come from outside of that particular piece, then it has to make a decision, sometimes consciously, sometimes unconsciously, whether that adds to, weakens what they're trying to do, et cetera. And then you get these kinds of dynamics that take place typically between institutions. You give lip service to things, but it's one of the things that keep institutions from even functioning together. So I said all that to say this, is that that's the reality. If you're not conscious of it, you're not consciously trying to break through. That's what I like about Dr. Cosby here, is that just from seeing him move, I know he understands that, but he'll cut straight through that. And you got to be intentional when you do that. Otherwise, it will just proceed to perpetuate itself. So you have to be intentional. So, when you start talking about strengths and weaknesses of a community, when you start thinking about opportunities and the lack thereof, which seems obvious to you, this is what we should be doing. The question that strikes me most, and this is the journey I'm on now, because I've always been on it, is why do we perpetuate the greatest weakness in our community? And you know what that greatest weakness is, from my perspective? Disorganization.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
What do I mean by that? What I mean is those institutions, those missions are reinforcing themselves over and over again, and nothing's going to stop that. Let's say make some internal piece or some tsunami comes from the left or the right, something happens dramatically. But the fact of the matter is that to intentionally come together and work together toward agreed upon common goals, notwithstanding what else you do. Doesn't mean you got to undo what you're doing.
Mm-hmm.
Then you got that other element, leadership. Fortunately and unfortunately, we're human. And all those things that go with that manifest itself in terms of how people lead. So I try to define it this way. When I start thinking about institutions, I start thinking about leadership. I just put it in simple terms. We got to learn how to do business better, as opposed to emoting and putting that imprint of personality necessarily. We need to define our goals, come together, work toward those goals together. Now, that's just my thinking. That's who I am. But it is a difficult proposition in my journey up to this point. Hope I didn't take that too far.
No, you can really add to that, Dr. Cosby.
I think that what was the catalyst for so much organizational solidarity in days past was that Black folks, whether you be part of the Black boule, skiwee professional class, or whether you be a regular brother on the street, we all knew that we were fighting against a system that was trying to annihilate us. So there was solidarity. So I think the theme was organize or agonize.
That's it.
So Dr. King talked about what took place in Montgomery when Black people stayed off a bus for 381 days. I don't think we have the strength as a people to do today what they did in the 50s with the Montgomery. I mean, that was really a feat. I mean, I want you to think about it. These were domestics, sharecroppers. These were people who had no power, but they organized. Rosa Parks was arrested December 1st, 1955. That night, they were at the Holt Street Baptist Church organizing. But they were able to do it because they had their institutions in place. They had their networks in place. We don't have that. There has been fragmentation.
Yes.
Eugene Robinson, Pulitzer Prize winner, wrote a book called Disintegration. And he says today, you don't have just a Black community. You have Black immigrants. You got Black mega rich like Jay-Z and Beyonce and LeBron James. You got aspiring Black middle class. And then he says you have the Black abandoned poor. That's what Eugene Robinson.
Wow. As I hear that, and I'm listening to Senator Neal and yourself, this question is this nagging question about the rebirth or the resurgence or the revival. To get to where we need to get to, how do we get there? Especially when you mentioned about leadership and people having the same vision. One thing that made the work of Dr. King so powerful is even though they had their disagreements, they knew they had one purpose in common. They had a common goal with a common vision for a common outcome. And I agree with you, that is so fragmented today. And so when we think about, because that's the last pillar, for our policy summit, is like this resurgence, this revival, this rebirth. How do we get there? Because the one thing that I appreciate is Dr. King's movement wasn't just Black people. And that is why we have to understand it can be us and it has to be us for us, but we still can't do it alone. And so how do we begin to think about, if at all possible, how do we revive that type of fire? And then what do we need to do from a policy perspective, Senator, to kind of drive home the change that we need so that people can feel like there's a revival for Black bodies rather than funerals for Black bodies, that there's a revival for Black joy rather than having to sit in Black trauma, that I can hear the cries of Black people rather than the cries of Black blood.
Say that again. Say that one more time.
Rather than hearing the cries of Black blood. How do we come to this point? Because I'm going to be honest. I don't know about you. I'm tired.
I know that's right.
I'm tired. I'm tired of having to sit in the room and be the representative for all Black women. Why marginalize us? But the biggest question, and I wrestle with it, and you can frame it how you want to frame it, however it sits well with you. But how do we come to this point of that revival? The Black church needs to be revived. How do we come to a point of, the senator said, we have power. Dr. Cosby said, but the church will let all the politicians in there don't keep problem and don't realize. I'm going to stop here because I'll ask it 50 million times. How do we get to this place? What's the first step that we should be thinking about for this resurgence? For our healing?
If I may.
You may.
I think it's a matter of being intentional. And we can talk this to death. And talk is crucial because, like, this gathering here is part of that process. But you have to act. You just go beyond that. Just to give you an idea of this little thing I'm engaged in right now, is I decided, well, I've been talking about this, I observe this, I understand this, then what do I do in this space? So one thing I do, well, several things. One is I don't deal in negatives, even when it's brought to me. Even when I'm attacked, which is rare, but it's in my face. Yeah, look at the structure of my face. My point is, but if you're intentional and you take action,
Yes, sir.
then you can get results. And you're going to learn as you engage. That's what this is about, quite frankly. So my point is that I am now on a mission to deal with leadership. And I'm going around specifically dealing with various aspects of leadership. And what I'm finding, I should say, after talking and engaging, what I found is that we didn't disagree on anything. Think about that. If we agree on 1, 2, 3, and 4, and we declare that this is essential to going forward, then the question is, how do we take individual and institutional mission and focus and incorporate that into our relationship with each other to achieve those agreed upon objectives? I look at things in those terms. I was very much involved in the civil rights movement. You got arrested 11 times back in the day. It was fun. I was a little high school student, load us up and they get us out until one time I got arrested so many times they kept us. But my point is that one thing that I did notice back then is that when I was in the side chair looking at the leaders trying to get themselves together on action, man, they were brutal in those rooms. I mean, this wasn't a sweetheart deal. This wasn't something where people trying to, make everybody feel good. They were on each other. But one thing they agreed upon, once we determined that, we come out of this room together, and I never saw them flinch. No one outside could see it. So my point is, I think we just have to be intentional, and we need to act on it. I think this is part of it. Yes. I think we can exercise that power. I don't think it's complex. I think it takes persistence. It takes focus. It takes all kinds of determination. And we're going to learn. We're going to miss points, and you're going to get a reaction. Historically, every action, you've heard that every action gets an equal and opposite reaction. I guarantee you're going to get a reaction. We live in a period of that right now. So I'm just saying, I think it's about it intentionally. I think it's about leadership. I think it's about followership, having a sense of intentionality and understanding that we must agree. You can't just go out there and do stuff. You have to really sit down and create objectives, define them, and then operate and move toward them.
Keyword, intentionality. I'll turn it over to you, Dr. Cosby.
I think we tend to romanticize the civil rights movement and think that Dr. King had the support of all Black America. He didn't. In fact, his arch nemesis was a pastor in Chicago named Joseph H. Jackson, who was the president of the National Baptist Convention, USA. And he despised Dr. King so much that when they named the street Dr. King Boulevard in Chicago and his church happened to be on it, he moved the address of the church to another door of the church so it would not be Olivet Baptist Church on King Jr. Boulevard. You don't wait until everyone is going to agree with you.
Hallelujah.
Before you begin a revolution. Right?
Yes.
The metaphor of the Bible is you're the salt of the earth. Just a little, the leaven. A little leaven helps the whole dough to rise.
Because if you're not clear on what I'm saying, you're not clear on where I'm going. And the other thing that we have to understand, I sat in the room and I'm tired of this. And so you can throw rocks at me. You can go freeze some snowballs. I'll give you my address so you can hit me with them in the wintertime. Like Tanya said, I ain't scared. At the end of the day, if we don't learn how to build lines. It's one thing, we stay in a struggle story and we stay in a single story. And so we stay isolated. When we can break that and understand that the story of the region, of Appalachia, the story of who we are, it is going to require, how do we interlace? How do we get intentional about interlacing the truth of Black and white and all of these other things? I'm not looking for the other white man or white woman to say, oh, I'm guilty. Let's just acknowledge what has happened, and then learn how do we work together. If we don't get to that place, they're going to keep on doing what they're doing. They're going to keep on doing. And what's that state for us? Just look at your neighbor and say, you, my future, my community. One thing I can appreciate in hearing Dr. Cosby, in hearing the senator, right now work to legacy work. What you build should build a future, not just a moment.
Exactly.
How am I going to pass the torch? What am I going to do? How do I want to show up? We know that unless two together agree, they can't walk together. Who are you walking with? And are they truly in agreement with you? Truthfully. Or are they just sitting there garnishing, taking up your energy, wasting your anointing and your time? They don't want to do the work to get to where they have to be. They'd rather just be on your back. I don't need no monkeys on my back.
Hallelujah.
At some point in time, we have to understand that in order to get to where we're going to get to, this room needs to look like it's looking, but it doesn't need to look like it's looking just with lip service. I don't believe in that. Yes. It's to be in service. In service. And when we can learn to be in service to one another, that I can understand your pain, I can walk with you in purpose, I can understand your trauma, I can get curious about you, because we are no longer symptomizing people, as I said yesterday. We are humanizing them. And that's going to take us to do that. Yes, ma'am. It's going to take us to define us. Yes. And it's going to take me to see you and you to see me. Right. Because the truth of the matter is, and I close with this, we do get into this work. Even with Simmons, it was some trauma there. We get into this work building on our trauma. We build on our trauma. Mama lose son to gun violence. She get with all the mothers. But there's no leaders there. There's no healers there. There's just pain there. So part of this work too is, how do we come together to build in our pain, to build out of our pain? We have to learn, and it's going to take one step at a time. And don't be in such a hurry. How long were we enslaved? We so many hundreds of years behind. Don't make nobody rush you. Tell them I'll get there when I get there. I get to take my time. You didn't help me back for so long, and now you want me to run? No, I'm going to walk, because I need to see what I can glean along the way. I am never in a rush, because I want to know. Let me tell you, what's before me? Is it a pothole? Is it a pit? What's before me? Is it a snare? But if I'm rushing, I get caught up in all of them. But if I take my time, I get to see and stop and say, Brother Cosby. He said something, and I just got to just use this. He gave a theme on the Samaritans. And he told us in class about the Samaritan man. And I'm just going to take his last words. You got to walk slow so I can see, so I can get off my ass and do something. And I don't mean, I'm not cussing, but what did he do?
It was a donkey in ass.
That's right. He got off his ass. And he saw about the wounded person. Some of y'all just going to have to tell people, get off your ass and do something. Yes, that's true. Oh, you cussing, Bishop. No, I'm not. He just told you it was a donkey. I'm not. But that becomes the curiosity and the concern that we have for one another. And in order to have community, we got to have curiosity. We have to have concern. I want to thank you again.
Thank you so much.
The very first Black Resurgence Award. And it says, Black proudly presents the Black Resurgence Award to President Reverend Dr. Kevin Cosby for being an instrument of change for the community. And you can take it out. It's just so thank you for all that you do, for being a pillar in the community on purpose.
Thank you so much. I will treasure this.